Good evening, everyone. Welcome to what we're going to call a chat with Professor Silvia Kouwenburg, which is taking place within the context of Ling 6611 workshop series on professionalism in linguistics. Now, the course facilitates the development of the soft skills in students, those skills that they would not typically be taught in content-driven or theory courses. It also teaches students a little bit more about life in academia, covers topics like teaching at the university level, academic politics, and other interesting topics. And the aim of the course is to create more rounded students, to create the ideal UWI graduate. And of course, the course coordinator is Dr. Joseph Farquharson. My name is Andre Bernard, and my guest this evening is Professor Silvia Kouwenburg. Just before we get into the discussion, the conversation with Prof. Kouwenburg, let me tell you a little bit about her. She has her BA, her MA, and her PhD all awarded by the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. She is Professor of Linguistics and Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Humanities and Education here at the University of the West Indies, MONA, where she has worked since October 1991. She is co-editor with John Victor Singler of the Handbook of Pidgin and Creole Studies and has published widely on Berbice, Dutch Creole, and Papiamento. All of this we're going to be getting into as the conversation progresses. She is known for her work on reduplication in Jamaican Creole, in Caribbean Creole languages, as a matter of fact, and researches the historical context of Creolization in Jamaica. She collaborates with Dr. Michelle Kennedy and Dr. Yuande Lewis Folcom of Literacy Studies. Dr. Kennedy is from the Department of Linguistics in the development of training for primary school teachers in the teaching of English in a Creole-speaking context. Welcome, Prof. Kouwenburg. Such a pleasure to have you. Let's start with why Jamaica? You're from the Netherlands and your education was carried out in the Netherlands. Why are you not there? Why are you here?
Right. Okay. So yes, I'm from the Netherlands, and my education was in the Netherlands. But my area of specialization took me to the Caribbean.
I see.
So my specialization is the study of Caribbean
Creole languages.
Right. And at the time that I was completing my dissertation, I was thinking about my, career prospects. Where was I going to go next? And I really liked the idea of working in the Caribbean, at least for a while. At the time, I wasn't looking very far ahead.
Yes.
And I thought about my options. So the English-speaking Caribbean was a good option because the language is not a barrier, and I already knew people and I knew some of their work. The French-speaking Caribbean was problematic because I didn't really know people in the French Caribbean. Same for the Spanish Caribbean. In the Dutch Caribbean, I knew people.
Well,
but
yeah.
The colonial politics get in the way.
Oh.
So I thought about my opportunities in the English-speaking Caribbean, and between Jamaica and I think at the time St. Augustine had a vacancy as well, I settled on Jamaica.
Okay. I've got to understand that you didn't start out in linguistics either.
Right.
Tell us about your educational journey in that regard, and what is it that facilitated this shift to linguistics?
Right. So imagine that you're in high school. Think back to the time that you're in high school, right? And you're trying to figure out where to go next.
Right.
And at the time that I was in high school, the little bit of guidance that we got about, selecting, which university to go to, which subject to study, what the career prospects were, our guidance there was almost non-existent, and today it's not much better. That's what I observed.
Wow.
So in high school, I was doing a combination of foreign languages and science subjects. And I just went through the handbooks of the different universities and chose something. And although I really enjoyed doing languages, I chose not to study language at the time because I did not think that there was a career prospect in studying languages other than coming back to my same high school, which I really didn't like very much.
Okay, probably to teach,
There,
right?
exactly. So it was social sciences, social policy studies to be precise.
Okay.
And I actually really enjoyed that program.
Okay.
But it also actually took me into linguistics because in that program I ended up with a group of students whose focus was on the position of ethnic minorities in the Netherlands, and more specifically on the position of Caribbean nationals in the Netherlands, people who had come from Suriname and from the Dutch Antilles. And through that exposure I was exposed also to culture, language. I ended up learning a bit of Sranang, I ended up learning quite a bit of Papiamento, and I ended up doing a minor in linguistics as a result.
Wow. And so the aim of that particular project of which you're a part was to do what exactly?
So remember that I was doing a master's in social policy.
In social policy.
Right. So we were looking at how the welfare state, the Dutch welfare state, did or did not cope with the specific needs of ethnic minorities in the Netherlands. And we looked at, we approached it from a number of different angles. We looked at, the history of migration. We looked at the spread of ethnic minorities in the Netherlands, how it ended up that they were concentrated in particular areas and in particular social brackets.
Yes.
What sorts of cultural and language policy, or rather, no, more generally, what sorts of policies disadvantage these groups?
So you were examining their plight and seeing what you could do about it.
Well, also their strengths,
Okay.
cultural groups, and their social cohesion. Yes, it was very interesting.
Right, and so and it sounds interesting. At what point did you come to terms with the fact that you're not really going to stay in social policy and you are going to venture into linguistics?
Okay, I did my minor in linguistics, like
Right.
I said, because I visited the Department of Linguistics, having learned that there might be something there about languages like Papiamento and Sranang. I was really fortunate that there were people in that department whose names you might recognize: Peter Muisken, Norval Smith,
Yes.
Hans de Beste, who were themselves students of Creole languages.
Right.
And I was even more fortunate because Mervyn Allain visited the Netherlands in the final year of my program.
So you got all the big names.
That's right.
Okay.
And Mervyn Allain came to the Netherlands specifically to do research on Saramaccan. He wanted to do research on Saramaccan. And I had very good connections in the Surinamese community at the time.
Okay.
So I was able to actually organize his fieldwork.
Okay.
So I ended up as some kind of research assistant for Mervyn.
For Mervyn Allain.
Yes.
Not knowing who Mervyn Allain would be in the future, or what would...
was.
Oh, he was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because this was in the late, when was I completing? The late 80s. So
Okay. Yes, he was already an authority.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes. He was a big name in the field. So it was quite something, really. And the Saramaccan people really respected him. And he also respected them. It was a very mutual,
Right.
reciprocal relationship.
So you learned a lot from that experience.
I did, yes.
I suppose little did you know that it would be a part of that process of molding you into becoming the linguist that you are today.
Right, so having gone through that experience, Peter Muisken then actually approached me and said, okay, you're completing your master's.
Yes.
we would like someone to do research on Dutch Creole in Guyana, because they had learned that from the research that Ian Robertson had done, that there were still speakers of Dutch Creole in Guyana.
That's Berbice Dutch Creole.
That's Berbice Dutch. And that's how I ended up with first a little bit of funding just to go to Guyana and find out if it was feasible to do this research.
To find out if it was feasible.
If it was feasible.
That's funny.
And also, of course, to convince the funding agents.
Yes.
Because why would they fund a research project in linguistics for somebody whose degree was not in linguistics?
Right.
So with that initial bit of funding for exploration, and with the materials that I brought back from that 1 month, just a 1 month in the field, they were then convinced to fund a bigger project.
Okay. And how did that? So what actually happened? Did you complete the masters in social policy?
Of course I did,
Okay.
yeah.
And then, so where did linguistics come in now?
Right, so I completed my Master's in Social Policy Studies while at the same time preparing to do field work in Guyana. So having done that 1 month field work, I then got this bigger project. So that changed my life completely.
Okay. Tell us about the project.
Right, so in the Dutch system at the time, it was possible to get funding for, I don't remember, it was 3 or 4 years to do PhD research. So it was, it would pay a stipend, just like a scholarship here really. It paid a stipend, but as part of the budget, you also had travel funds. So you had to actually submit a budget that included all the expenses that you could foresee for your travel, for the field work.
Okay. And that was going to be taken care of for 3 to 4 years.
That was therefore taken care of, that's right. So I ended up spending a total of about 14 or so months, I think, in Guyana over 3 different periods. Doing the field work in Guyana was really an amazing experience. So the location is about 100 miles up the Berbice River. The mode of transport is paddling. So
paddling.
One
Okay. Okay.
Canoe,
This is interesting. Yes.
Dugout canoe,
Yes.
some as shallow as this, right?
Wow.
And you learn to paddle, right?
Yes. And you do that to get to the location. So this course is all about teaching students what life within the academy is like.
Right.
And so I'd love for you to tell us what the experience of collecting data for your research was like, so that they can benefit from that.
Yeah, so a big part of data collection is actually building a relationship with the people that you're working with.
Yes. Why is that important?
Well, you need them to actually want to talk to you, right?
That's true.
If they don't want to talk to you,
then you have no data, right?
No. So I remember the first time I went to see a lady called Amy Thomas. And she was actually somewhat reluctant to speak to me. I don't know. She was just generally a little
skeptic.
reticent,
Yes, yes.
I had gotten some advice from Ian Robertson about what to bring to give people. And one piece of advice he had given me is to bring cooking oil.
Cooking
oil. You
oil.
have to remember that this was a time that everything was scarce in Guyana.
Yes.
Everything was scarce. And so I had brought some cooking oil and then distributed that over smaller amounts because I had several people to give cooking oil.
Right.
So when she said, she didn't really have time to speak to me, which was her way of saying that she didn't want to
speak to you,
I said, okay, not a problem. I have something to leave with you, and maybe next time you'll have time. Next time she had time.
Yeah, so cooking oil worked. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, she had time next time. And yes, we ended up being friendly.
Okay.
Yes.
What were some of the challenges that you faced in that process? Data collection can sometimes be so arduous, for the researcher. What were some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Okay, so the first challenge was actually getting to the Berbice River. It's not like there's any normal transportation to go to the river. So at various times I begged a ride with somebody who had a ranch on the river. I traveled on the river on a bauxite barge. And it can be difficult because when you rely on others, the movements of others, then
Yes.
You have no control over when people come and go.
True.
The other thing was getting to my particular informant. So at some point, I was able to actually find a family that I could stay with on the river, and that helped.
You had
a
one
lot.
informant?
No, I had several.
Okay.
I had several.
Okay.
In all, I worked with about 10 different persons over the period of time. So being on the river helped, but then it was still the case that some people were at a good distance. And one of my informants who I worked with was a lady named Hilda Adolf, and the second time that I went to Berbice, she had actually moved to another part of the river.
Okay.
And I ended up going there with 2 other women. The 3 of us were paddling, and it had to be, there's no way that one person could have done that easily.
Okay.
We had to wait for the tide to go up so that we could travel up with the tide.
Oh dear.
And paddle for 2.5 hours.
I don't know if I could have done that. Or I suppose in pursuit of the data, and because you want to ensure the integrity of your data, you will do whatever it takes.
Well, exactly.
to get it. Okay. So through all of
But
this.
listen, it was enjoyable.
Okay.
It was really enjoyable
Yes.
because you end up being immersed in a different way of life. And that's an amazing experience in itself.
I'm very happy that you said that. How important is that to the process of research? Because understandably, because of the rigor of the work, many persons see research as something that is so formidable and boring. How important is it for the researcher to find a way to discover some level of enjoyment in the process?
Right. Right. Yes. No. Well, it's not. It's. I wouldn't so much say that it's level of enjoyment as you have to have a connection with your subject, and if your subject is a human subject, it's about human behavior.
Yes.
The connection has to be with the people.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. When I was a student preparing to go on fieldwork,
Yes.
I spoke to somebody in the Netherlands who had done fieldwork in Cameroon. And his fieldwork had been he had lived or stayed in a monastery with the monks, and his informants had been recruited from a neighboring village and had come to the monastery, where he had sat down and interviewed them for hours.
Right.
He had had no immersion experience.
Wow.
And I was curious how, when the language of a community is a tone language, how people sing, because in Western culture we're used to imposing melody
Right.
in singing. But if there is already a melody
In speech.
because it's a tone language,
Right.
so what do you do? He couldn't answer that question. He couldn't answer the question because he had not been in the community. So I, of course, have done research also in Nigeria, in Calabarian. I can answer the question. I can answer my own question.
Okay. So you're saying this absence of immersion into the community. So, and there's a way in which that is important because as the researcher, I'm assuming, you can tell me if it is so or not, you get a certain level of respect from interacting with your informants, and you learn so much more about it, makes the data richer, and certainly there is a way in which they feel that they're a part of a process which is somehow recognizing something that is so important to one's identity, and that is your language.
That's right.
Is that okay?
Yes. In that regard, actually, Guyana, Berbice, and Kalabari, Nigeria, were rather different experiences. The language I researched in Guyana was a dying language. The people who I researched the language with, my informants, had not spoken it on any regular basis for at least 30 years, and sometimes longer,
Okay.
The only speech I recorded was speech between them and me. was really unnatural situations, because even if they were in the same room together, they would not speak Berbice Dutch together, because they hadn't done that for decades. The language had been completely hidden. Neighbors, friends did not know that they spoke anything other than Creolese. So by being there and researching the language and pulling this out of this its hiding, it sort of regained some status. But it really had been a language that people had looked down upon and considered something that ought to be forgotten together with other traditional practices that somehow people had ended up believing were not valid in the modern world. In Kalabari, on the other hand, when I came to Kalabari and explained to people that I was there to study their language, they were like, "Oh, good, because we've got a lot that you can learn."
Okay.
Yeah, it was
So
a
they were
totally different experience.
Was it hard in Guyana? Was it hard to elicit the data, since it was the case that people didn't think highly of it, nor did they use it, even if they were in the presence of other persons who would have known it?
Right.
How challenging was that for you as the researcher?
Okay.
Was it like pulling teeth?
It depends. I collected data in different formats, so part of it was simply through conversation, and asking what things are called, but also conversation about people's, how they grew up, and how do you build a canoe, and stuff like that, right? So by having people talk, they produce the structures of language that are then available for you to study. Now, as you know, in linguistics, we try to also elicit actual, judgments on structures to see, what might be the limits of possibility, or we'd like to elicit some judgments on the semantics of a construction. What does it mean to say it this way as opposed to that way? Now, that is difficult, especially because it is a way to think about language that people are not used to.
That's true.
And not everybody can do that. I had one Berbice Dutch speaker, Mr. Arnold King, who was actually very good at reflecting on language.
Yes.
So from that perspective, for elicitation, he was one of my best speakers. I had one. Some constructions are relatively marginal, right? They're not produced a whole lot. They're very discourse specific. One such construction is verb focus. And I remember one story where he told me that somebody he knew had claimed to have lost his gun, but he felt that the man hadn't lost it. He had lied about it. He'd actually sold it. Okay. And so in Berbice Dutch, he was telling me the story in Berbice Dutch, and the literal translation of what he said in Berbice Dutch is "de lose him say him lose it, as sell him sell it," right? It's the way you would say it in Jamaican Creole.
Jamaican Creole, right.
Good. So he said this in Berbice Dutch. I said, "Oh, wonderful! Here's a nice, verb-focused construction." Right. So I was trying to actually elicit more verb-focused constructions
from them,
from him and other speakers.
Yes.
Impossible. Every time I come up with a great context, a great story, and in this context, can you say? And I produce a focus. No. You can't say it. And I got so desperate that I gave him back his own construction. I said, "Look, what about a situation in which somebody claims that they lost something, but they actually sold it?" And in Berbice Dutch, I said, so can you then say, they lose him, say him lose it. I sell him, sell it. No, he says, no, you can't say this.
He says no.
Right. Because okay, so I said, all right. I got very desperate. I said, all right. If you say it, what does it mean? And and then he had very clear intuitions on the semantics.
Okay.
So I was never going to get any elicited verb-focused constructions, although I have a limited number of them in spontaneous production.
Yes.
But I was able to get some insights from him on the semantics of some of these constructions. So
Okay.
Right. Yes.
I find it so interesting that although he produced it,
Yes.
when you gave it back to him,
Yes, he said no.
And I'm imagining that you must have been so thrown off by that.
Well, it was just funny. It was just funny.
So you go through all of that, you get the PhD in linguistics, and the thesis was, what was the title of it?
A Grammar of Berbice Dutch Creole.
Grammar of Berbice Dutch Creole.
It's on the table right there.
Yes, we can work on that, and we're inviting our audience members to have a look at the samples of some of the publications of Professor Kouwenburg. So that happened, you got the PhD.
I got the job in Jamaica.
Oh, you got the job in Jamaica. That's exactly where I was going to take it now.
Yes.
So you're here now. This is 1991.
That's right.
You're fresh from the Netherlands.
Yes.
What was that experience like here in Jamaica?
Right.
By the way, what would have brought you here to Jamaica after the PhD?
You mean the airline? No. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Because I noticed that you made the connection in the data you got from what's his name? The Adams?
Arnold King?
Arnold, from Arnold. You made a connection with Jamaican Creole.
Right.
So I'm wondering, so now you finished, how did you get the job in Jamaica?
Oh, okay. So, like I explained earlier, I had more or less decided on Jamaica,
Yes.
but that didn't mean, of course, that Jamaica was going to choose me.
True.
All right. But remember that I knew Merv and Alain.
Yes.
I also knew that there was a vacancy that they had not been able to fill.
Okay.
Not because they didn't have applicants, but because the applicants were then a little taken aback when they saw the financial offer. I remember that Jacques Arends had applied for the position the year before I came here, and we had been very happy to make him an offer, and then when he compared what the offer would amount to and what the cost of a loaf of bread would be, he decided he could not afford to bring his children here.
Okay.
Right. You have to remember that those were the days when our salaries were incredibly little. In fact, when I came here, I made less than I would have collected on social benefits in the Netherlands.
So hold up.
Right.
Hold up. So if that is the case, and what you'd be getting as salary would
Yes.
be less than what you would have got as a part of the social benefit program there in the Netherlands, why would any reasonable, sensible individual choose here?
Because, first of all, I wanted to work, okay? I didn't want to sit at home and collect social benefits, okay? That's no start for a career, right? I wanted to work, good.
Yes.
And, I didn't have dependents, not like Jacques Arends, who had a wife and 3 children, okay? And I was still very much in student mode. I could get by on very little.
You don't.
And I had some savings. I had some savings.
Yes.
And so I was able to get a car to bring here. So that was very good. So yes, it was no big deal really.
Yeah, it wasn't that horrible.
No, it wasn't that horrible.
Or it wasn't horrible.
I mean, I learned what shelves to pass by without looking in the supermarket, and what shelves I could pick from. Yeah, and my friends and neighbors on campus were in the same situation. So it wasn't like me alone, me one suffering.
Yes. So when you came here, you're now in this new context. What did you have as your long-term goal at the time?
I did not have a long-term goal at the time. That's what I said earlier. I wasn't really looking very far ahead. UE gave me a 3-year contract. I said, okay, I'll be here for 3 years and then I'll see what next.
Yes.
And so at the end of the 3-year contract, I actually did go away for a year because I had then received funding again in the Netherlands for the research in Nigeria. So I went away for a year, but I came back for my second contract.
Okay.
Yes. And then after that it was tenure.
Yes.
Yes.
And so how different is, all right, so you'd have done all of your degrees at the University of Amsterdam. You're now here in Jamaica and you are working at the University of the West Indies, Mona. How different was the experience here from what you were accustomed to in the Netherlands?
All right, let me comment on two things. One, the students. I had very, very little teaching experience at University of Amsterdam because I had been researcher. So I'd done a little bit of teaching, but not much. And I really, really liked the teaching. And I really liked the interaction with the students right away. So that was one. The other thing is that I was so used at University of Amsterdam that people's doors were open, that there was constant debate, that every Friday afternoon the linguistics section would get together and there'd be a talk, and then there'd be some drinks and snacks, and there'd be both the informal interactions as well as the formal debates. And there was none of that here, and that felt very isolating. That felt academically isolating. And this is before internet. The library was also not so great. So it was very important to me that I could go back to the Netherlands every summer and renew my library card at University of Amsterdam and use the library. And in summer people are often gone, but usually one or two people were there, and I'd kind of catch up with them and see what was happening. And try to catch a workshop or a conference somewhere.
Or a discussion happening on a Friday night, probably.
Yes, exactly, yes.
This course, Silvia, is about the development, the honing of the soft skills. Before we move away from your research or talking about it, what were some of the soft skills that you learned during the process of carrying out the research, the data collection, the data analysis, particularly the interaction with the informants? What are some of the soft skills that you learned that you think that the students in the workshop series can benefit from?
Right. So today there are very formal processes of ethics approval. When I was doing my research, there were no formal processes of ethics approval, but nevertheless I think it was always clear to me that the only good relationship with an informant is a respectful relationship. And so I think that's an important starting point.
Respect for your informants.
Respect for your informants, because you're going to be interacting, or I was going to be interacting with people who had very, very little education, in some cases none whatsoever. But at the same time, they were very important to me because they had knowledge that I did not have, right? So clearly, I was going to be learning. I was going to be their student. They were going to be educating me. That's right. As a researcher, of course, a big part of what you're doing is writing. And again, there was no actual formal process of showing me how to do that. I think we do a lot of hand-holding these days, right? We do.
Would disagree with you and tell you that we probably need to do a little more.
Even more, okay. But what I did, and I had fellow postgraduate students, PhD students, and we also talked to each other a lot.
Yes.
I also learned from some of the things they did. Actually look at the writing, that you think is good writing. And try to learn from that, make it, the model for your writing. So when you see that an opening paragraph of an article that you think is well written, that the opening paragraph starts a certain way and has a certain structure and uses a certain terminology, then, you emulate that and you try to incorporate these practices of writing.
Right.
And the more you do it, of course, the better. Better you become.
But it was a group-centered thing, so it was as a group of students, you guys were teaching each other.
Some of it, yes. It was individual, but also, yes, we also had discussions about that. Okay, another important thing is writing applications
Writing applications.
Writing applications, because
Let's talk about that.
that PhD scholarship that I got, that wasn't on the basis of a one-page proposal. And I've seen students who think that a PhD proposal is a two-page proposal. So unfortunately, that's not how it works.
Yes.
So if you're going to be putting in an application for funding, then you have to have a substantial proposal with lots and lots and lots of detail. And so that it's a job in itself to put that together.
So let me ask you, as I imagine some students may want to know, what is it exactly that you call a substantial proposal? Because many times, well, we know that as teachers, what the students view as substantial and what you view as substantial are two different interpretations of the word. So what are you considering to be a substantial content for the proposal?
Right. So first of all, you have to show that you're familiar with the relevant literature. So the proposal has to have good context, and the context is academic. So you have to survey what is already known about the particular language or the aspect of language or whatever it is you want to study. And you have to be able to show what are the gaps in knowledge that your research is expecting to address, how it is that you're going to be contributing to scholarship, why the knowledge that you're going to be bringing or the output of your work, why it is considered to be important for your field.
What's the significance of the work, really?
Yes, what's the significance of the work and what kind of output do you expect from it?
By output you mean?
Well, in this case, a dissertation and perhaps articles as well. You have to have good timelines. You have to be able to plan, for the whatever years you're going into that research for. You have to be able to plan your timelines and your deliverables. And because it's tied to a budget, you have to then also be able to put together a very detailed budget.
Right. And in all of
so
this,
you have to anticipate
realistic.
everything. Yeah.
Yes, because sometimes students can be overly ambitious, don't you find?
Oh, absolutely.
So
but deciding to do a grammar, is overly ambitious,
But were you?
But I did it.
Ambitious,
I did it.
you
Yeah.
have that to show today.
Right.
But how do you temper those expectations? Because the truth is that kind of ambition is necessary for you to make a meaningful kind of difference. You have to be willing to shake things up a little bit, and you can't be afraid to do that. But how do you tailor that with realistic expectations?
I think everybody has to figure that out for themselves.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes. And ultimately, the material that you collect will have to speak for itself.
Yes.
And actually, when I went into this research, the reason that it was considered doable is that I was supposed to be working with a template for the grammar. And this was courtesy of Norval Smith, who was one of my supervisors, along with Peter Meisker. Norval Smith was co-editor with Bernard Comrie of a typological series of grammars. And they had a particular template. And the idea was that I would use the same template and write my grammar of Berbice Dutch. So I looked at the template and it has all these, headings, and I thought, oh yeah, it's just, sort of fill in the blanks type of thing. But when I started trying to do that, I realized that I could not follow that template and do justice to my data. And so I did a report to my supervisors that explained why I wasn't going to be working with the template, and they were very upset. But I was also very sure of myself, and in the end they had to accept the decision.
So that you came up with
but I really had to prove myself. Well, I more or less structured the dissertation, as I said, in the way that the data suggested it to me. So.
And that worked out well.
And it worked out well.
Many students at this level are wondering what they can do with linguistics. Here it is that you're a case. You didn't start in linguistics, but you ended up in linguistics, and right now you are an authority in linguistics. what advice would you give to them? I mean, we know that especially here in Jamaica, just to localize it for a little bit, there is a focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and there was a case even when some minister of government or the other said things in the humanities are luxury subjects. So with this kind of view out there about courses in the humanities and courses like linguistics, what would you say to a student who is wondering why they should do linguistics and what their opportunities are in the field?
Right. So first of all, I think we can look at some of our own graduates to show that there is nothing limiting about linguistics, and that it can take you into a variety of different areas.
Yes.
And, you know, I can just call out, for instance, one of my own graduates is Rocky Mead,
Yes.
who I'm sure got some pushback in the JDF when he decided to pursue a PhD in linguistics, because what use was that going to be?
Right.
But it helped him. It helped him quite a bit in his own development as somebody who is able to contribute analytic skills, thinking on your feet, being organized in your planning, doing data analysis. All of those things are very important.
And he's the chief of defense.
Exactly. So it certainly didn't hurt him.
Yes, certainly.
So both here and in the Netherlands, because it's the same situation there, you know, why would you study linguistics? Okay, there's the same. It's the same idea that you know, these humanities subjects have no particular use.
Yes.
But the people that I was at University of Amsterdam with have all branched out into different directions. Some of them, of course, have gone into academia, like myself.
Yes.
But I also have a couple of people who had done PhDs in linguistics and who actually set up organizations that provide language services of various kinds. One of her projects was a multilingualism exhibition, an interactive multilingualism exhibition with the Tropical Institute in Amsterdam, for instance.
Yes.
The other is now organizing a big language festival that takes place on an annual basis, and they all have smaller projects that are just going on, you know, continuously.
Right. So the ability to branch. So that means linguistics makes you quite versatile.
It makes you quite versatile because a lot of the skills that we apply in linguistics are not specific to linguistics. And I'm reminded of how people used to say, people who had Latin in school, which is definitely considered a useless language in terms of the fact that it's not spoken at all, that people who studied Latin in school said, yes, but it helped me to think efficiently or to think analytically. So I would say, okay, the study of any language can do that for you.
Definitely.
And so that is a big thing that studying linguistics brings, I think, to students. So you end up having to work with data sets, having to work through the data sets, having to actually see patterns, having to apply a model to the analysis of those patterns and make some sense of them. And then, of course, the reporting skills that we require require pretty substantial skills in argumentation, organization of your thought,
Analysis.
presentation of your materials. All of those things matter. And we're hearing more and more that the so-called soft skills, the thinking on your feet, the critical thinking, the analytic skills, the presentational skills, that those soft skills are actually not soft skills because employers require them.
That is what they're looking for.
It is what they're looking
for. And on
for.
that note, let me just advise the ladies and gentlemen in the audience that we are shortly going to be taking your questions for Professor Kouwenburg. And so the last question I'm going to ask you before we open the floor for questions. So do think about the things that you want to ask. The last question I want to ask you before we open the floor for the audience is, there is a situation that we're facing at this time where we're seeing a decrease in the number of students who enroll for programs in the humanities. What do you think is the reason for that, and what can we do to address that problem?
Right. So the reason is the very reason you put your finger on earlier. The fact that people do not see the career perspectives.
Yes.
And it's the very reason that I did not study linguistics to begin, right?
Yes.
And yeah, okay. So
what am I going to do with this?
exactly.
Yes.
What am I going to do with this? And so I think we really need to reach out to guidance counselors in the schools.
Yes.
Because it is the guidance counselors who actually have an opportunity to let students understand that the world does not just consist of 5 different professions, right? What is it? Law, engineering, medicine?
Yes.
Help me out.
I don't know, dentistry, or I don't know.
Right.
Some other profession that is not in my mind.
Okay, so if management, right.
Yes,
So
business, yes.
if all we did was produce graduates in engineering, medical sciences, and management studies, do you think this economy would grow? Of course not. Because the economy requires the cultural and creative people.
Yes.
It requires the people who have the critical and analytic skills.
True. It really can't.
It requires the people who have the communicative and presentational skills.
Yes.
And there is no way that the society could function properly with just managers, engineers, and doctors.
And lawyers.
And lawyers, sorry, I forget about lawyers. Can't forget lawyers, yes. Yeah, so, you know, the way I went to university when I was 18 years old, I picked something that I thought I would like. And I, you know, continued to follow the direction that I was able to engage with, and it worked out for me. And that is really what my recommendation is to students coming at university. Pick what you like.
Yes.
Because you can study accounting and know that you're going to be an accountant. But what if you get that degree and you start working as an accountant and you actually hate it? How long do you think you're going to stay there? And we have seen cases of people who did just that, you know.
Yes, many.
Their family pushes them in a safe direction.
Yes.
They get a degree and then they just hate what they're doing.
Yes. I know a case actually of a medical doctor who she went through the 5 years and she did it, and at the end she was in events management because that is what she wanted to do.
Right.
So planning projects and events, that is what ignited the fire in her soul, and so that is what she pursued.
So she should have come here and do entertainment and cultural enterprise management.
She probably should have done.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you so much, Sylvia. But this, we're going to put a pause on the discussion that is taking place up here, and we're going to invite the members of the audience to pose your questions to Professor Kouwenburg, and she will answer accordingly. Who is first? Who is first this evening? Let's not all play the shy game. Who is first? The lady with the bright smile? You can go ahead. That's you. That's you.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. What's your name?
My name is Jadine.
Jadine? Okay.
That's right. I'd just like to know some of the options apart from teaching and by communication. What are the other options
What are the, so let me ask you then, why did you choose linguistics?
Well, since growing up, I've always had an interest in language and so forth, and I was raised around teachers, so where I had to speak like English language, so and like hearing like what we bring was like variations and so forth. But at that time, before I know all of this about variations and so forth, I was wondering why was this and why was that. So I'm now getting the answers to those questions that I had before.
Okay. All right. So you're taking a real interest in questions of variation in language and the kind of impact it has in society and in the communication between people. Right.
Also, I'm interested in speech language pathology.
Right. Okay. So, well, the speech language pathology is a program we're not able to offer as yet, but for anybody with a deep interest in language variation, and in how language variation has an impact in society and in the way that people communicate, I would say that career perspectives that have to do with communication, with public relations, with getting messages out for either public service or private companies, that those are the careers that you would be looking at. And so you can think, for instance, about the communication needs that a Ministry of Health might have, where information about a particular condition and what people can do to prevent it has to be presented in a way that the message will get through to people. And that is where you would be able to come in and actually create the material that can do that, and think of innovative ways of reaching out to the audience.
You know, Silvia, just before you proceed, I agree with you, because I've often sat and thought about the fact that the information coming from ministries like the Ministry of Finance is so indecipherable to even those who work in media, sometimes the presenters of the information, that I shudder to think of the extent to which those who are hearing it would understand it.
Oh, absolutely.
And so there is a need, Jadine, for this kind of the intermediary to help with the successful translation, if you will, of the material.
And I think sometimes we really have to be bold and go to those organizations and say, look, I have taken a good look at your materials and I think it's ineffective, and I think I can help you with that. And one of my graduates had actually done that with Pulse.
With Pulse?
With Pulse. She went to Pulse agency, says, look, I've read through some of your press statements and I think I could improve them. And they hired her.
That's wonderful.
I know. That's why I said sometimes you just have to be bold, because they don't even know that they have this need. It has to be made known to them that the way they're communicating with the public is ineffective, and if they actually find it important to get a message through to people, they should hire people who can do that for them.
Thank you. JD, is your question answered?
Yes, thank you.
All right then. Can we hear from someone else, if you don't have a follow-up? Dr. Parkinson.
Okay, I'm going to ask not about linguistics or anything. I'm going to ask about your process of Jamaicanizing or Jamaicanization. So, what is your favorite Jamaican dish to cook? And is there any Jamaican food that you cannot cook?
First of all, I like Jamaican cuisine. I like everything about Jamaican cuisine, okay? I like the greasiness and the spiciness.
That makes two of us.
Everything. But I do not cook Jamaican food because I cannot improve on Jamaican cooking, okay? I cannot improve on Jamaican cooking, so I do not cook Jamaican.
You sure?
I am quite sure. I do not cook Jamaican. Now, the only exception to that is when I go abroad now.
Yes.
When I go abroad to where there are no Jamaicans.
Yes.
And then I will try to introduce my fellow non-Jamaicans to Jamaican food. So I carry some canned ackee and I make ackee and saltfish. Or I try my hand at Escovitch fish. And rice and peas, and Joseph knows of this because he was in Leipzig at one time when I was there as well.
Was it
and we did that.
Okay.
Probably better than that.
So the process of Jamaicanization, shall I say that it was long and it has not ended. I consider myself well adjusted by now. But it was difficult at first. And well, because of that isolation that I spoke to you about. So I did make some good friends right away, but I also felt that because of the lack of openness in the department and more generally in the faculty, it was really difficult to make friends among my colleagues. It was easier to make friends among people who were not my colleagues and people who were not Jamaican.
When you say lack of openness within the department, what do you mean?
Well, like I said earlier, at the department at the University of Amsterdam, there was an open door policy.
Yes.
And everybody was always talking to each other.
Yes.
So that was completely missing here. And people I found were fairly distant. They were not very approachable, generally speaking. There was also, because of the time I came here in 1991, UWI had gone through a period of what you might call decolonization, because remember that UWI had been set up as a college of the
Yes, the University College of the West Indies.
Exactly. So it had been a college of University of London,
right.
and it had been populated initially with white colonial academics.
Yes.
And initially, for Jamaican or regional Caribbean scholars to move up in that hierarchy, there had been roadblocks.
Yes. That's probably putting it nice.
Yeah, that's probably putting it nicely. Exactly. So when I came here in 1991, there were still lingering feelings of resentment.
But you're white.
Yes, exactly.
So why would it apply to you?
Well, there were still lingering feelings of resentment against this whole colonial construct.
Yes.
Where, you know, the higher positions in the academy had been for the white colonial academics.
So they see you as just another one
Right.
who's just going to come and take the position that they've been working so hard to get, but they won't get because they're black.
Right. And then the other thing is because we were then so poorly paid, so this is now very ambiguous, we were then so poorly paid that they had to, at that point, they had had the experience of people like me coming in, spending a semester or maybe a year, and then getting out of here as fast as they could.
Right.
So they felt some resentment also because they felt that UWI, Mona was being used as a stepping stone for people who had other options.
Right.
And so I don't think people were quite taking bets on how long I was going to last, but nobody felt I was going to last very long. Let me put it that way.
I appreciate it.
Right.
And let me just add something else. I suppose your being a woman didn't make it any easier.
That's right.
To what extent did that complicate things?
I think it made the expectation that I wasn't going to last stronger. That's what I think. I never felt that there was any other impact in this. I mean, for me, it didn't matter, right?
Yes.
I knew what I could do for myself, and I knew that I could, make a life. But I think for others, it mattered. Yeah.
Two things I want to ask you on that note. How did you deal with it? One, and has it changed?
Right. So how did I deal with it? I guess I outlasted it. And yes, it has changed. I think UWI has become a more welcoming environment for sort of non-Caribbean nationals, including white non-Caribbean nationals. Yes. And for my own case, it's now also the case, of course, that our salaries have improved. My life is quite comfortable. So that whole idea that UWI was just a stepping stone, a big part of that was the fact that the salaries were so very low.
Right.
And what would I have done if it had remained that bad? I don't know. I might not have stayed.
Probably.
I might not have stayed. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't like to speculate, on the what ifs.
The what ifs.
But still, I still remember the day when I went from $13,000 a month to $22,000 a month. And my colleagues were actually saying, listen, try not to spend the money because next month we might be getting an IOU instead of a salary.
I see. Any questions from the audience? So Janine has posed hers.
Okay. And Jodianne.
My question is, why did you decide to come back to UWI after going to Nigeria to study?
Right. The year that I was away was a year on a postdoc grant, so it was not a job. It was a postdoc grant. So I had been here initially on a 3-year contract, and that contract was renewed, but I requested a year's leave so that I could do the research for my postdoctoral. Right, so I did not have an intention to work in Nigeria, for instance.
Just for your postdoc?
Yes, it was just for postdoctoral research. Yes. Now, I should say that I have at 1 or 2 points applied for positions elsewhere, but not very. I haven't pursued it very, very seriously. And at one time, I was actually invited to apply for a position at Michigan, which is a very nice university, right? And I thought about it for about 1 second because I did not think that living in an environment where there was going to be snow on the ground for 9 months in the year was going to work for me.
Not at all.
Right.
Work for me,
So it doesn't matter how nice the university is and how nice the linguistics department is, that wasn't going to be me.
I'm appreciating the way in which, just from this discussion, we're realizing all the different variables that impact your decision to stay in any one place and how you progress within the academy. Jodianne, is that your name? Okay.
You mentioned before that you start very long time ago. Did you eventually find a direction you wanted to go in, or just making some opportunities and representing?
I heard the first part. I didn't have any long-term goals. And then what?
Did you find a direction that you wanted to go in, or did you just make use of opportunities as they presented themselves?
Right. I think I would say I pretty much just went with the flow. And then at some point, I looked at where I was and I said, I've been here for so many years now, and I've bought a house, and I like my life, and this worked out for me.
And so
that's pretty much it.
Yes.
What skills has your career path cost you that you didn't have before?
What skills have I acquired that I didn't have before? Well, I think one is teaching. Teaching skill, because I was not trained to teach, and I pretty much had to learn how to do it on the job. And I find that teaching continues to be challenging, and that one has to be adaptable. I've also generally been I'm really a somewhat introverted person, but to teach, you have to stand up in front of a class and talk to them, and also get them to talk. So you can't be introverted. So I had to kind of overcome that. Yeah.
Okay. Or, nothing's going to change the fact that you're an introvert. Probably you have to tap into a little more extroversion.
That's right.
Yes. Okay, so that's teaching and engaging with students, or I suppose that would help you to engage with people in general as a result of the skills you would have acquired in the classroom. Anything else?
Absolutely true. I can't think of anything.
Not at the moment. Not a problem. That's fine. Yes. Did you have another question? Okay. Troste, do you have a question? Still thinking. Try to see if we can hear the question, for example, within the next minute or so. Okino, is that an indication of another question?
I want to know what do you do outside of linguistics?
What do I do?
How do you integrate yourself in the Jamaican society? I don't know if you have any family members here or anything like that. So what do you do outside of
linguistics? Yes.
So let me say, first of all, that academic life can be very, very absorbing, because the temptation is to really just do that all the time, because after all, you can put down your laptop and work. You don't really need any, big equipment or anything. And so you have to consciously really, look for or make sure that you reserve time to do other things. I've not been very good at that. But in my life, I do have a husband whom I spend some time with. I spend time with.
Okay.
And I have some sports activities, and I'm with a club called the Jamaica Caves organization. So from time to time we go out and clamber into caves and explore them.
Exciting, nice.
Very adventurous.
And you should have told me that earlier so that we could talk about it a little bit, but continue.
It is adventurous, trust me. And yes, so things like that. And if somebody says, "Oh, Silvia, we're going on a hike, you want to join?" I generally say yes, because I know I need to get out more.
I appreciate the question, Okina, because many persons think of academic life in the way you describe it. Lord Jesus, you just read, and write, a galang. So what fun is there to that? And I'm very happy that it is fun.
It is fun.
What is fun? Just a read, and a write, a galang. So?
No, but you discover things.
Yes.
You discover things, and that's what makes it fun.
Yes. And also it must be fulfilling to see your work as a means of contributing meaningfully to some sort of change or transformation, some improvement of some kind.
Right.
But generally, the students don't generally look at it through those lenses, and so they may think that it's really humdrum and a lot of stress and pressure. So I'm happy that you are able to show us that.
Right.
Although you have to make an effort to do so, there is still the opportunity to find time.
Well, as an example, one of the areas that I have studied is the period called Early English Jamaica, and I had a very specific goal, and that goal was to undermine what I call the Akan dominance myth. Which has it that Jamaicans by and large are descended from Ghanaians, from enslaved Africans that came from the Gold Coast.
Right.
And so I had to undertake the historical research for that. I had to do my own research with the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database. I did some research in the archives in London. So it's a lot of non-linguistic research, but it provided me with the basis on which to talk about the presence of language in Jamaica. So like I said, I went into that research with a very specific goal, and I have been able to show, I think convincingly, that certainly the first 50 years of Jamaican society was that the enslaved population was ethnically and linguistically diverse. Right. And so there's the insights that I've been able to contribute to the discussion about Jamaican history. And I think that's important because it contributes to beliefs about the origins of Jamaican culture and Jamaican identity.
Yes.
Although I'm not a historian, I ended up writing entries for the Oxford Online Bibliography in Atlantic History, the editor-in-chief of which is Trevor Bernard. And so the fact that he asked me to write those entries, I think, says that my research is seen as historically relevant.
Yes.
And I was able, through those entries, to sort of show how linguistic research contributes to historical understanding.
Right. And of course the present day relevance, because that has serious implications for how we view ourselves. Chance there?
Here's my question. When you were going to Ghana during or after your studies, when you were learning from the Ghanaian people, did you happen to absorb any of their native tongue while you were learning from them during your research?
Right. Okay, so the research was in Nigeria, actually. And the research I did there was in a community called Kalabari, which consists of 30 small towns in the Niger Delta. I spent most of my time in the major town called Asari, which is also the town that retains more of the cultural and religious practices that are ancestral to Kalabari, more than the other towns where various forms of Christianity have had a lot of impact. So the goal of language research is of course to understand the language that you're researching, but from my perspective, the best way to engage with a language is to actually learn to speak it. So the important thing here is also that most Kalabaris are in fact monolingual. So if I was going to have any kind of data collection, I also had to be able to ask them questions. So when I came away from Nigeria, I was a reasonably fluent speaker of Kalabari. I have pretty much lost that ability by now, but yes, I did actually learn the language.
Did that help with your, let me ask, in what way or in what ways did that help with that particular research? The fact that you're able to speak it, did it engender a kind of appreciation of the language that contributed to the way in which you would have carried out the research?
Right. So it allowed me it allowed me to be less reliant on sort of intermediaries. I think that's important. So I could actually engage with people directly and have conversations with them. I, of course, needed to be able to transcribe my recordings and make sense of them. So you can't do that unless you know a language, obviously. And also because I had learned to speak the language reasonably well, I could observe things around me and say, I'm hearing something here that's of interest. Let me see if I can find out more about it. And so if you have to rely only on elicitation to study a language, then you cannot learn from the spontaneous production of a language.
Understandable. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes?
Apart from even language barriers,
Can you get a little volume, please? Just a little volume, please.
Apart from any language barriers, how did you find adjusting to the cultures of other places?
Right, adjusting to the cultures of other places. So, first of all, there's a big difference between adjusting to the culture of a place that you're visiting and adjusting to the culture of a place where you know you're going to be living. So, in the case of Kalabari, I was going to be there for 4 months. And I wanted to experience as much as possible of Kalabari life. And I was fortunate because there were a number of festivals that took place while I was there, masquerades, which are part of the traditional religious practice of Kalabari. So that was great. I was also able to travel to some of the other towns and interview people there and learn something about their history and some of their cultural practices. I witnessed several funerals, which are huge in Kalabari. I learned to dress in the Kalabari style and to sort of, conform to expectations of dress and the like. And I have now totally forgotten your question.
But the other part of it is, certainly in terms of how you outlined it.
Yes.
The difference between adjusting to a place that you're visiting versus one that you plan to live in.
Exactly. So I could have stayed in Kalabari for a year. I loved it. Would I have wanted to stay in Kalabari for life? I don't think so.
Okay.
Because, life in Kalabari would have been very limiting for me as an academic. But then perhaps, living in Port Harcourt, which is the nearest major town and where there is a university, and then visiting Kalabari, that kind of life, I think that would be possible. So Jamaica, of course, is a place where I actually came to live.
Yes.
And so it was far more important for me to be able to adjust here, and I found it harder here.
Okay. Any other questions? Okino wants to know, wants a little detail on that. is that you found it hard to adjust to life in Jamaica. Tell us a little bit about that. What were some of the hardships? If you could identify three, what were the three hardest things to adjust to?
Okay, all right. So there's one thing that I really miss. One thing that I really, really miss, and that is freedom of movement. And when I say freedom of movement, I do not mean being able to get into a car and drive somewhere. When I say freedom of movement, I mean being able to choose your mode of transportation, be it walking, riding a bicycle, taking public transport, or driving, and knowing that you can choose your mode of transportation wherever you are and whatever time of day or night.
Right.
And that is clearly not the case here.
Right.
And I think, you know, that's quite limiting, and it also limits how you can get to know a city, for instance. So anywhere in Europe, I would just get a bicycle and ride around a city, and I would get to know a city that way. And that's not the way you can get to know Kingston. So I find that that's something I really, really miss. The other thing I found, difficult was to actually build friendships, as I said earlier. I found that because the expectation was right from the start that Silvia wasn't going to be staying, that people were not willing to invest in a relationship. So making friends with my local colleagues turned out to be very difficult. So like I said, I've made better friends with people who are non-Jamaican, but several of them have also left. Several of them have also left. So it limited my, you know, social circle.
And your interpersonal relationships, and that's so very integral to your optimal operation as a human being.
Right, and then the third thing was the academic isolation that I spoke of earlier, which, you know, internet has really had a huge and positive impact there. That academic isolation, I think, is more or less, you know, is much less. It's still the case that, of course, if we're going to have a conference here, it must be one that we organize, whereas if you're in a place like the Netherlands in Europe, you have to limit the number of conferences you're going to, because there are so many universities and so many workshops and conferences and colloquia that you have to choose where you want to go.
Yes.
So that remains, you know, somewhat isolating.
Yes.
That feeling remains a bit, but the fact that we do have internet, that we have access to online resources, has really has had a big positive impact.
Yes, and you did mention that there is now an increased level of openness, probably not as open as it would be, or as certainly as you're accustomed to in the Netherlands, but it's certainly getting closer to that open door policy.
I think it's a little better, yes.
Well, that has brought us to the end of our chat with Professor Silvia Kouwenburg for this evening. I have to thank you, Prof, for gracing us with your presence and sharing the tremendous insight that you have to offer. I know there is more, but probably we can follow this up with another workshop. I'd also like to thank the team from Mona Information Technology Services, Dr. Joseph Farquharson, the coordinator for the course, and all 5 or 6 persons who turned out to the event today. We really appreciated your presence. My name is Andre Bernard. Have a good evening.